"Can I eat with you, ma'am? Or do you only eat by yourself?" the little voice asked, soft but clear, and the fork slipped right out of Ellen Parker's hand and clattered onto the plate. For a second she thought she had imagined it, the way she sometimes imagined her late husband's voice when the house got too quiet. But then she looked up from her meatloaf and mashed potatoes and saw him. A skinny black boy, maybe 9 or 10, stood at the edge of her booth in Miller's Diner, holding a plastic tray with a kid's burger, his backpack still on, one shoelace half untied. His big brown eyes were serious but a little scared, like he was ready to run if she yelled at him. Ellen felt her heart jump in her chest. Nobody ever asked to sit with her. The waitresses knew not to even offer any more. For 3 years, since her husband Tom died, it had always been the same, the corner booth, the same meatloaf special, 1 cup of coffee, and then back home to the small, silent house. What did you say?" she asked, her voice thinner than she meant it to be. He swallowed and lifted his chin. "I asked if I can eat with you. You look real lonely. My teacher says we're not supposed to let people eat alone if we can help it." His words tumbled out in a rush, like he had practiced the line in his head and was afraid he'd forget it. For a moment Ellen just stared. People in this small Ohio town barely even looked at her now. Her only son had died in a car crash 10 years earlier. Tom had followed with a heart attack 3 years ago, just before Christmas. No brothers, no sisters, no cousins who called. She was the widow on Maple Street now, the quiet white lady who shuffled to the diner at 6 o'clock and shuffled home at 7. And here was this child, this stranger, asking to share her table like it was the most normal thing in the world. I don't know if you'd want to sit with me," she said, trying to smile. "I'm not very interesting, you know." He frowned at that, serious as a judge. "My mama says everybody's interesting if you listen long enough. And you remind me of my grandma. She used to talk to her food too." His eyes softened. "Please. The other tables are real loud." Ellen followed his gaze. A group of teenagers laughed too loud in the back. A couple argued, in low, sharp whispers, by the window. The booth across the aisle held a family of 4. The parents passing ketchup back and forth, while the little girl swung her feet. That used to be her life, she thought. A table that felt full. Her own tray sat in front of her, 1 neat napkin, 1 glass of water, 1 set of silverware, 1 of everything. Her throat ached. "Of course you can sit," she heard herself say. "What's your name?" He slid into the booth like he was afraid she'd change her mind. "Jordan," he said. "Jordan Brooks. I'm in 5th grade." He pushed his tray closer to the middle of the table, like it was important that their food be side by side. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Ellen," she replied. It felt strange to say it out loud to someone new. "Ellen Parker." Jordan took a big bite of his burger, chewed, swallowed, then looked up at her again. "Hi, Miss Ellen. Now you're not eating alone anymore." And for the first time in a very long time, Ellen felt something warm and alive move in her chest that wasn't pain. The next morning the house felt even quieter than usual after that strange little dinner, like the walls were waiting for something. Ellen tried to shake the feeling off as she shuffled around the kitchen. She made her 1 scrambled egg, her 1 slice of toast, and carried her plate to the same small table where she always sat. The chair across from her stayed empty, but now, in her mind, she could see Jordan's skinny elbows on the formica, his eyes bright as he talked with his mouth full about how he loved science but hated fractions. "You're getting silly, Ellen," she muttered to herself, cutting her egg into tiny pieces. 1 meal with a child, and suddenly you're seeing ghosts with curly hair and sneakers. Still, she found herself listening to the quiet in a new way, wondering if maybe quiet wasn't supposed to last forever. After breakfast, she did her normal routine. She wiped down a counter that was already clean. She checked the mailbox even though the mail never came before noon. She straightened the picture frames on the living room shelf, her fingers lingering on the one of Tom in his army uniform, the one of their son Kevin in his baseball cap, mid-swing. "Well," she said softly to the empty room, "I met someone last night. A boy. You two would have liked him." Talking to their pictures had become a habit when grief was still new. It stuck, even after the sharp pain had turned into a slow, dull ache that lived in her chest like a heavy stone. Most days she didn't leave the house until it was time for the diner. Groceries could be delivered. Church was too full of well-meaning people who didn't know what to say, who winced when they accidentally said the word family around her. But Miller's diner was simple. Food, coffee, a quiet booth. No one asked questions. No one expected anything from her. At 5:30 though, Ellen found herself looking at the clock and thinking not about meatloaf but about a small voice saying, "Now you're not eating alone anymore." She told herself it had just been a one-time thing. Maybe his mom had come in and scolded him afterward. Maybe he wasn't even allowed to talk to strangers. She still wiped off her best cardigan with extra care and brushed her silver hair until it lay smooth. The late afternoon air held a hint of spring as she walked the 4 blocks to the diner. Kids rode bikes along the sidewalk. A dog barked behind a fence. She passed the old brick apartment building on the corner, the one with peeling paint and bikes chained out front, and saw a woman in blue scrubs hurrying up the steps with a lunchbox in her hand. For a second their eyes met, and Ellen gave a small nod. The woman gave a tight smile back and disappeared inside. Probably a nurse coming off a night shift, Ellen thought. Her own husband had spent a lot of time around nurses in those last months. Miller's diner glowed warm at the end of the block. When Ellen stepped inside, the bell over the door jingled like always, and the smell of grilled onions and coffee wrapped around her like a blanket. "Evening, Ms. Parker," called Linda from behind the counter. "The usual booth." "Yes, please," Ellen said, though her eyes were already scanning the room. Families, couples, one old man with a newspaper. No sign of Jordan. Of course there wouldn't be. She slid into her corner booth, fingers tracing the little scratch in the tabletop she'd noticed years ago. Linda poured her coffee without asking and handed her a menu she didn't need. "You doing okay today?" the waitress asked gently. Ellen opened her mouth to say her usual line, "I'm fine, thank you," when the bell over the door jingled again. A blast of cooler air brushed her neck. "Mama, wait," a boy called, and something about the voice made Ellen's heart jump. She turned. Jordan stood just inside the door, backpack on again, breathless like he'd run. The woman in scrubs from the apartment building was beside him, one hand on his shoulder. Up close, Ellen could see how tired the woman's eyes were, with little shadows under them, how her curls were pulled back in a hurry. "I told you, we don't have time to stop," the woman was saying. But Jordan was already twisting away, his gaze locked on Ellen's booth. "There she is." "Mama, that's her," he said, excitement fighting with nerves. "That's Miss Ellen, see? I told you, she was real." The woman's eyes followed his pointing finger. For a second, her face went completely still. Something like shock flickered through her gaze as she looked at Ellen. Really looked, and Ellen felt a strange chill crawl up her spine, like someone had just opened a window in her chest. She had never seen this woman before in her life. Had she? Jordan tugged harder. "Can I sit with her again, please? She doesn't have anybody." "And you said Jordan," the woman said sharply, cutting him off, but her eyes never left Ellen's face. Now, there was something else there too, not just surprise. Something softer, sadder, like recognition. "Go say hi," she said finally, her voice rough. "I'll be right over." Jordan dashed across the diner and slid into the booth like last time, grinning wide. "Hi, Miss Ellen. Did you miss me?" "I almost missed you, 'cause Mama got off late." Ellen looked from him to his mother, who was now standing a few feet away, hands clenched around a small paper bag. "I suppose I did," she said honestly. "Hello there." Up close, the woman in scrubs looked even more tired, but she also looked braver than Ellen felt most days. The blue name tag clipped to her pocket read Alicia Brugsajani. "I'm sorry if he bothered you yesterday," she said, forcing a smile. "Jordan talks to everybody. I keep telling him not to sit with strangers, but he says you're not a stranger now." "He wasn't any bother," Ellen said quickly. "Enjoyed the company." She hesitated, feeling shy for the first time in years. "You're welcome to sit too, if you'd like. Long day." Alicia's eyes flicked toward the door like she might still run. Then she sighed, and some of the tightness in her shoulders let go. "The longest," she said, "but we got a few minutes." She slid into the booth across from Ellen, beside her son, and for the first time in a very long time. There were 3 menus on the table, instead of 1. They came back the next night. Ellen told herself it was just because Alicia's shift ended at that time, because the diner was on their way home, because kids liked routines. But when the bell jingled at 6 o'clock, and Jordan rushed in like a small storm, bees buzzing on his tongue about a science project, something inside her relaxed like it had been holding its breath all day. By the 3rd night, Linda just brought 3 waters and 2 kids' menus, without asking. Ellen learned little pieces of their life, in between bites of meatloaf and fries. Jordan hated spelling, but loved drawing. Alicia worked nights at County General, mostly on the Hart floor. They lived in the brick apartments on the corner, 2 floors up, with a broken elevator and neighbors who argued through the walls. Alicia's mom had died when she was a teenager. Jordan's dad lived in another state and called sometimes, but not enough. "It's just us," Alicia said with a little shrug, like that wasn't a hard thing. "Me too," Ellen said quietly. "Just me now." After a week, their dinners moved from the diner to Ellen's small kitchen. It happened one rainy evening when Jordan burst into the booth with his hair dripping and said, "Miss Ellen, our power went out again and Mama says the stove won't work and I'm hungry." Without thinking, Ellen had said, "Well, I have a working stove 5 houses down. Come on." Alicia had hesitated at first, but the rain pounded harder against the diner windows, and her shoes were soaked through, and her son was giving her that hopeful look that always cracked her heart. "You sure?" she asked. "I'm sure," Ellen said, surprising herself with how strong her voice sounded. "I make a pretty good chicken noodle soup, if I do say so." Soon there were 3 bowls on Ellen's table, steam fogging her glasses. Jordan slurped loudly and laughed when Alicia scolded him for it. Ellen watched them, soaking in the mess, the noise, the way Jordan's backpack dropped in the corner like it belonged there. Her eyes drifted to the empty chair across from her, the one Tom once filled. For a second, the old ache pinched. But then Jordan said, "Miss Ellen, do you have any stories?" And she found herself talking about Tom's terrible jokes and Kevin's baseball days. And the ache softened into something else. Something like warmth. Halfway through the meal, Alicia went quiet. She had been studying the photos on the wall as Ellen talked, her gaze flicking from one frame to the next. Finally, she reached out with a trembling hand and touched the picture of Tom in his hospital gown, taken a few days before he died, when the nurse had convinced him to sit up and smile for his wife. "That's your husband, right?" Alicia asked, though her voice said she already knew. Ellen nodded. "Yes, that's Tom. He passed 3 years ago. Heart failure. County General." Her eyes dimmed for a moment. "I never got to hear his last words. They said he went suddenly, while I was getting coffee." For a long heartbeat, Alicia didn't move. Then she sat back slowly, her hand covering her mouth. Her own eyes filled with tears, and when she spoke again, her voice shook. "County General, 3 years ago, on the Hart floor," she whispered. "Ellen, what was his full name?" "Thomas Parker," Ellen said, her own heart beginning to race for reasons she didn't understand. "Why?" Alicia closed her eyes like she'd been hit. Jordan looked between them, confused, soup spoon hanging in midair. "Mama." I was there, Alicia said, turning to Ellen with a look that made Ellen's breath catch. I was his nurse. His last week. He talked about you every night. Ellen stared at her. The kitchen seemed to tilt, the yellow walls blurring at the edges. No, she said, shaking her head. My nurse was. I don't remember her name. I was so tired. She grabbed at details. She had braids, silver hoop earrings. She hummed church songs sometimes. That was me, Alicia whispered. Tears spilled down her cheeks now. I was there the night when he passed. I held his hand. I sat with him when you went for coffee, because I didn't want him to be alone. The room went very still. Ellen felt like every clock in the world had stopped ticking. What? What did he say? She choked out. Before. Did he say anything? They never told me. Alicia nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. He talked about you, she said. He said, my Ellie loves the diner on Maple, the one with the meatloaf. She'll be all alone when I'm gone. She doesn't have anybody left. If you ever find her. Alicia swallowed hard. He kept telling me your name. Ellen Parker, gray scarf, lives near Miller's diner. He made me say it back to him, like a promise. Ellen's hands flew to her mouth. The scarf, the diner, the way Alicia had looked at her in the doorway. Pieces that had been loose in her heart suddenly clicked into place. All this time, she whispered. You knew. I tried to find you, Alicia said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. I really did. I checked the hospital files, but they don't give out addresses. I drove up and down Maple Street once, but I didn't know which house was yours. Then life got busy, and I always felt guilty about that. Like I'd broken my promise to him. She reached for Jordan's shoulder, pulling him closer. When we moved into those apartments last year and I saw an Ellen Parker on the mailbox list, I thought my heart would jump right out of my chest, she continued. I started asking around, but nobody really knew you. Just that you came to the diner alone every night. So I told Jordan to look for a lady with gray hair and a gray scarf at Miller's. I said, if you see her eating alone, you go sit with her, okay? You make sure she knows she's not invisible. Her voice broke. I never thought it would actually work. Ellen felt tears on her own cheeks now, hot and unstoppable. Tom's face looked back at her from the frame, his eyes kind even through the pain. The idea that his love had reached across those years, across the quiet, to send this boy to her table, made something inside her crack wide open. She pressed a shaking hand against her chest, feeling her heart beat under her palm. Tom, she whispered, half laughing through her tears. You stubborn, wonderful man. Jordan looked even more confused, but also strangely proud. So, Mama was Grandpa Tom's nurse? He asked slowly, trying the title out like a new shoe. And he sent us to you. Something like that, Alicia said, pulling him into a side hug. She looked back at Ellen. I'm sorry it took so long. I really am. Ellen stood up, her knees creaking in protest, and walked around the small table. For a second she just looked at Alicia, at this woman who had held her husband's hand when she couldn't, who had carried his worry for her for 3 long years. Then she bent down and wrapped her arms around her, holding on like she was drowning and had finally found something solid. Thank you, she whispered into Alicia's shoulder, for being there when I wasn't, for bringing him back to me in a way. Alicia hugged her back, just as tight. Jordan, squished between them, started laughing and complaining he couldn't breathe, which made both women laugh through their tears. Standing there, in a messy kitchen that suddenly felt less empty, Ellen realized that something deep and heavy had shifted. The chair across from her wouldn't be empty anymore, not really. It had just been waiting. From that night on, Ellen's house was never truly quiet again. Jordan seemed to take it as a personal mission to fill every empty space with sound. He thumped his backpack onto the couch each afternoon like he had always done it, asking, Miss Ellen, you ever seen a volcano project before? Or do you got any tape? Like a lot of tape? He sprawled on her rug doing homework while old game shows flickered on the TV. He left his sneakers in the hallway where she tripped over them and then apologized 100 times while she secretly smiled. Alicia came by on her breaks when she could, still in her scrubs, hair pulled back, eyes tired but softer now. Sometimes she brought takeout and insisted Ellen sit while she did the dishes. Sometimes Ellen shooed her onto the couch and brought her homemade pot roast on a tray like she was the nurse now. On Sundays, when Alicia's shift allowed, the three of them walked to the park, Jordan racing ahead on his bike, while the two women shared stories about hospital hallways and the strange ways people say goodbye. As the weeks turned into months, Ellen noticed changes in herself too. She started waking up before her alarm. Not because the silence pressed on her, but because she had a list in her head. Jordan's school project, Alicia's favorite coffee creamer to pick up, a recipe she wanted to try. The stone in her chest still sat. Their grief didn't pack its bags, just because new people had moved in, but it wasn't the only thing inside her anymore. There was also color, movement, noise. One Tuesday evening, as they sat around the table picking at a lopsided lasagna Jordan had helped assemble, Alicia cleared her throat. "So, I got offered a promotion today," she said, trying to sound casual and failing. "Nurse manager, same floor," Jordan whooped, nearly knocking over his milk. "That means more money, right? Can I get real basketball shoes now? Not the ones from the thrift store?" "Yes, it means more money," Alicia laughed, ruffling his hair. Then her smile faded a little as she turned toward Ellen. "It also means more hours, more nights, a lot more responsibility. I'm happy, but I'm also scared." She looked down at her plate. "I don't want to leave you alone again." Ellen's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The old fear jumped up fast and sharp, whispering, "See? People leave. They always leave." She pressed it down gently, like smoothing a wrinkle from a tablecloth. "Oh, honey," she said, "you have to take it. You've earned it. Tom would scold me from heaven if I let my fear get in the way of your future." Alicia's eyes shone. "You really think so?" "I know so," Ellen said. "And besides, I'm not alone. I've got a volcano-building 5th grader to keep me busy." She winked at Jordan, who grinned and went back to scraping cheese off his plate. Still, that night, after they had gone home and the house was quiet again, Ellen sat on the edge of her bed and let herself whisper the fear out loud. "What if they move?" she asked the dark. "What if the promotion comes with some big fancy job in another city? What if it all goes away?" There was no answer, of course, except the soft hum of the refrigerator down the hall and the faint echo of Jordan's laughter still bouncing around in her memory. The next day, Alicia showed up at her door with a folder in her hand and a strange look on her face. "Can we talk?" she asked, stepping into the living room. Jordan went straight for the TV, already halfway into a cartoon world. Ellen's stomach tightened. "Everything okay?" "They offered me the promotion," Alicia said, sitting down. "But they also said there's an opening at the hospital in Columbus. Triple the pay. Day shifts. Better schools for Jordan." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "It's everything I always said I wanted. And when they told me, all I could think about was you sitting in that booth at Miller's, eating by yourself." She looked up, eyes wet. "I don't know what to do, Ellen. I want to give my son the world. But the idea of packing up and leaving the first real family we've had in years," her voice broke. "It feels wrong." Ellen's heart squeezed. Part of her wanted to say, "Stay, please, stay." The words burned on her tongue. But another part, the part that had watched a husband fade in a hospital bed and had wished for more for him, knew that love sometimes meant letting go, not holding on. She took a slow breath. "What do you want your boy to see when he looks at you?" she asked gently. "Someone who is too scared to try, or someone brave enough to take a chance for both of you?" Alicia wiped her eyes, laughing through the tears. You sound like my mama. I sound like a woman who wishes someone had said that to me when I was young, Ellen replied. Listen, if you go, it will hurt. I won't lie. I'll miss the noise and the messy shoes and the volcano projects. But I lived 3 years with nothing but silence. I know I can survive it. What I can't survive is knowing I held you back. She stood and walked over to the small desk in the corner where she kept her important papers. From the top drawer, she pulled out a plain white envelope and brought it back, pressing it into Alicia's hands. I've been saving for a long time, she said. Tom left me the house and a little insurance money. I don't need much. My car is paid off, and I don't travel. This is for you. First month's rent, moving truck, whatever you need to make the jump a little less scary. Alicia stared at the envelope like it was on fire. Ellen, I can't. Yes, you can, Ellen said firmly. You didn't let my husband die alone. You kept a promise you made to a stranger and sent your child to my table so I wouldn't be invisible anymore. Let me do this. Let me keep a promise too. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the cartoon theme song from the TV. Then Alicia lunged forward and hugged her. The envelope crushed between them. I don't deserve you, she whispered. Sure you do, Ellen said, hugging her back. We deserve each other. In the end, Alicia didn't take the Columbus job. The envelope sat on her dresser for 3 days, while she stared at it every morning and every night, fingers itching to open it and sign the papers waiting in her email. But each evening she'd find herself at Ellen's table again, watching her son argue about homework with a woman who had once been a stranger and now felt like blood. On the 4th day, she walked into Ellen's kitchen and set the unopened envelope on the table. I told the hospital no, she said, before Ellen could ask. I took the manager job here. It's less money than Columbus, but more than I make now. We'll be okay. Ellen's eyes searched her face. Are you sure? I don't want you to regret it. Alicia smiled, and this time it reached all the way to her tired eyes. I'm sure, she said. I realized something. I've been chasing better my whole life. Better jobs, better neighborhoods, better test scores. But last night, when Jordan called you Grandma Ellen, without even thinking about it, I realized we already have the best thing. She took Ellen's hand. We have you. We have family. I can't put a price tag on that. The word grandma echoed in Ellen's chest, like a bell ringing in a church she'd forgotten how to enter. She looked over at Jordan, who was busy building a tower of crackers and cheese on his plate. You really called me that? She asked gently. Jordan shrugged, cheeks pink. It just came out, he mumbled. Then he looked up, eyes wide and worried. Was that not okay? I can stop if you want. Ellen's throat closed, and for a second she couldn't speak. She reached for him instead, pulling his small warm hand into hers. No, she whispered. Please, don't stop. After that, something official shifted. Alicia added Ellen's number to the school emergency contact list as grandmother. Ellen went with them to parent-teacher night, listening proudly as Jordan's teacher talked about his curiosity and his big heart. On Sundays, they started going to church together, sitting in the 3rd pew from the back, singing off-key, but trying. The first time someone leaned over and said, Your grandson has your eyes. Ellen cried in the car, all the way home, in a good way. She made an appointment with a lawyer downtown and changed her will, leaving the house to Alicia and a small savings account for Jordan's college. When the lawyer raised an eyebrow and asked if they were related, she smiled and said, Not by blood, by something better. Years passed in the small town that was no longer quite so small to Ellen. The gray scarf grew a little more worn at the edges. Jordan's shoes went from light-up sneakers to size 12 basketball height. Alicia's scrubs changed from plain blue to ones with nurse manager stitched under her name. The chicken noodle soup recipe got passed down and altered, with more pepper and less salt. but always served with 3 bowls on the table. One Thanksgiving, when the leaves in Ohio had turned red and gold, and the air smelled like wood smoke and pies. Ellen Parker stood in her kitchen stirring gravy, while laughter roared from the dining room. The table, once empty, now overflowed with people. Alicia and Jordan, of course, but also one of Alicia's co-workers, whose family lived too far away to visit. The old man from the diner, who had nowhere else to go, and Linda the waitress, who had closed the diner early for the first time in years to accept Ellen's invitation. "Grandma Ellen, you coming?" Jordan's voice called, deeper now at 17, but still holding that same light that had first tugged at her heart. He appeared in the doorway, taller than her now, his arm draped over her shoulders with ease. "We're about to say what we're thankful for, and you know you're gonna hog the list." She laughed, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I am not a list hog," she protested, "but I suppose I could think of a thing or two." She let him guide her to the head of the table, where a chair waited that everyone now understood belonged to her. As the plates were passed and the candles flickered, Ellen looked around at the faces turned toward her. So many of them had once believed they were alone. So many of them had once eaten in silence. And yet here they were, elbows bumping, voices overlapping, stories crossing like threads in a quilt. She thought of Tom in that hospital bed, his hand in Alicia's, making a nurse promise to find a lonely woman in a diner. She thought of a brave boy who had walked up to a stranger and said, "Can I eat with you?" when the whole world seemed to say, "Mind your business." She thought of all the nights she had stared at a single plate and believed her story was over. "Grandma." Jordan nudged her. "You okay?" "I'm perfect," she said softly, and she meant it. When it was her turn to say what she was thankful for, she looked at them all and felt her heart swell so big she thought it might burst. "I used to think I had no family," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But now I know the truth. Family isn't just the people you're born with, it's the people who see you sitting alone, slide onto the bench beside you, and make sure you never have to eat by yourself again."